Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sean Gallo. I'm the Partnerships Policy Director. And on behalf of the Partnership for Strong Communities, welcome to the next session at this year's Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. We have an exciting final plenary session for you today. In a moment, you'll hear from a panel of legislative leaders within the Connecticut General Assembly, where our moderators can be Bill Welz of Gallo and Robinson. And the panel will explore topics including housing development, services, supports, tenant protections, broader zoning reform, and more. Following the moderated panel discussion, panelists and legislators will engage in our audience question and answer period. After this session, there are still plenty of opportunities to learn. Make sure you're a part of the conversation in some of the amazing afternoon sessions we have lined up. We'd like to thank our leading sponsor, again, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. Our visionary sponsors, Connecticut Department of Housing and Wells Fargo. Our champion sponsors, Bank of America, J.D. Amelia and Associates, M&T Bank, Webster Bank, and the Melville Charitable Trust. And our foundation sponsors, Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, Cohn Resnick, and Trinity Financial. These supporters' deep support has allowed the conference to happen again this year. And now a few housekeeping items. Sessions being recorded, and we'll make all recordings available as soon as possible on the Partnership's YouTube channel. If you have a technology issue, please select the chat icon in the Zoom control panel and send it in the chat to me, Sean Gallo. We'll do our best to help you out. Your speakers will let you know how they'd like content questions to be submitted. After the session, you can complete a session feedback survey by clicking on the megaphone icon in the lobby. It's in the right-hand corner. With that, I'll turn it over to Bill Welz.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the session. I'm very excited to be doing this again. I think this is the third year I've gotten to host this panel, and with some faces that have been on here before, and some new faces too. And we're gonna have a good time. Just some background about me. I am the lobbyist for the Partnership for Strong Communities. Oh, there's Senator Rahman too. All right, we got it. We got everybody now almost. I'm a lobbyist for Partnership for Strong Communities. I've been lobbying with them since 2019, and I've gotten to work with this wonderful crew of folks in the legislature since then. Prior to my time there, I worked for the Office of Governor Dan Malloy for 6 out of the 8 years of his term, and ending my time at Director of Policy. So I just want to give a quick round of introductions to who we got on the call. I'm going to start with Senator Marilyn Moore, who was first elected in 2014 as the state senator from the 22nd Senatorial District, and that has Bridgeport, Trumbull, and Monroe. She is the co-chair of the Housing Committee, and she is the co-chair of the Bonding Subcommittee, where she champions affordable housing bonding. And thank you for that, Senator Moore. Rep. Geoff Luxenberg is from the state 12th House District, representing the town of Manchester. He has served from 2011 to 2015. He took a break on his own volition and then came back in 2019. He is currently the co-chair of the Housing Committee with Senator Moore, and they both have championed a very lengthy housing bill that passed on the final days of session. Good to have you, Geoff. Thank you for joining us. We have Senator MD Rahman, who is a Rahman, I think it's pronounced properly. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Senator, but freshman senator from the 4th Senate District, representing Andover, Bolton, Glastonbury, and Manchester. He is currently the co-chair of the Planning and Development Committee. And I think he might be frozen, but I'm sure he'll come back. And we have Rep. Eleni Kavros Degraw, who is currently in her 2nd term serving the House 17th District. That includes Avon and Canton. She is the other co-chair of the Planning and Development Committee. Both her and Senator Rahman have been doing a great undertaking of listening to all sides on the issue of zoning. And although something didn't pass last year, I'm sure their ears and eyes are all open for next year to for the upcoming session to see what can be done. Just quick few things on session. So the 2024 short session will kick off on February 7th. And because it's a short session, they will dive right into the governor's budget address. In the short session, the legislature is tasked with balancing the biennium budget that passed last year, while also working on individual pieces of legislation in the meantime. In the short session, there's only committee bills, as individual legislators can only raise proposed bills as it pertains to the budget. and it's a sprint, and they will be adjourning in May 8th. So it's not a lot of time to get stuff done, but and also with an election looming, that always comes into factor there. The current political layout of Connecticut, we have a Democratic governor still, Ned Lamont. We also have a Democratic majority in the House led by Speaker Ritter, which is right now 98 to 53. I think some of the elections in November might change things a bit, maybe not in those numbers, but there might be a new face here and there because some state reps ran successfully for mayor. And we have a Democratic supermajority in the Senate led by Senator Martin Looney at 24 to 12. Fiscally, the state closed FY 2023 with a $551 million surplus. The budget reserve fund is still packed at $3.3 billion, which is 15% of the general fund. The rainy day fund has been fully funded for the past 6 consecutive years. A lot of money was transferred to pay down teachers and state employee retirement benefits, our long-term obligations. We have seen these historically high surpluses over the past 6 years, and the state is expected to end this fiscal year with another large surplus of roughly $630 million. But the governor and comptroller are warning that revenues are likely to be dipped a little bit going forward. And so the state's guardrails must be preserved. That comes from them. So with that kind of set, and I know it was a lot to take in, but with that at least set for the short session, wanted to get in on some of these questions and hear from our great panelists. I will rotate around the questions so everybody can answer one first, but if I assume everybody's going to want to answer every single one of these questions. So if there's a rebuttal or something, you can give me a real hand. I don't need a virtual hand. I can see you all pretty well. And I'm going to start with Senator Marilyn Moore. Are you hearing from your constituents on housing issues? And if so, what do you hear about the most?
Well, last year in the last session, that was my first year on housing. And that public hearing that we had was a marathon, but also on the floor of the Senate, that was the longest time I don't feel like it was truly a debate. I think it was more of a filibuster for 9 hours and 14 minutes, blocking a lot of the work that I had worked with my colleague, Representative Luxenberg. But I'm still hearing that we didn't do enough, even though I think we did a lot based on the past and what had been done through housing. I think we passed a lot of good information and acts that will begin the process of improving housing. And we did some things on renters and holding the line on application fees, but we still heard, no matter what, that there's not enough housing that's affordable any place in Connecticut, and that people are moving in from outside of Connecticut, that we're paying higher rental prices or purchase prices for houses in other states and have come into Connecticut, and people feel like they're being pushed out of Connecticut because they can't afford it. So I think there's still a lot of work to do on affordable. I have people still calling me saying that their rent has been raised X amount of dollars and they can't afford it. And many times it's not an astronomical amount of money that's been raised. It's just that they were struggling to pay what they were paying at the current price, and any increase is tough. So the cost of housing for renters, I'm hearing, and with the interest rates to purchase a house higher than it was a year ago, I'm hearing that also.
And kind of let's just flow with the tradition of the housing committee right now. Let's kick over to Rep. Luxenberg.
Gosh, my Senator Moore did such a good summary. I barely could add anything useful. I guess maybe briefly for the benefit of the audience. I think contextually there were probably like 20 to 30 housing bills, you might say, or concepts that have been kicking around the legislature. And actually several, a significant chunk of planning and development concepts and bills as well that did make it into the final legislation, thanks to the co-chairs that are with us on the panel. But there were like the final bill that we passed, probably in total, it may have included like 30 proposals that had not gotten to the finish line some of which dated back, 5-10 years of being introduced every year and not ever getting there. So it was sort of an unusual feeling, I think, for all of us to, on the one hand, see so many good policies that people had before us, particularly my predecessor, Q Williams, who died very, very tragically at the start of session, had fought for so many years. To see so much of that become law felt like such an incredible victory in the area of housing. And yet, to the average person in Connecticut, experiencing the kind of pain and cost increases that Senator Moore has described so well, many of those victories haven't been felt yet in the marketplace. And so there's kind of a significant disconnect, I think, between what feels like real policy victories to us inside the Beltway of Hartford versus, like, what are you feeling if you're just a resident of Connecticut and you're experiencing the economic pain of being a tenant in a rising cost environment. So I think that's, what we have to really zero in on next session is what stuff didn't we do that maybe can alleviate some of that economic pressure.
Senator Rahman, what about you? Are you hearing from your constituents on housing? I'm gonna volley to Rep Kavros Degraw while his internet gets a little restored.
We'll get him unfrozen here just in a second. No, I would say that I'm hearing about it frequently. As everyone knows, we are, with the way we campaign, we knock doors, we make phone calls, and consistently, I know in my district, it comes up a lot. The biggest thing I would say that comes up in my district, and I'm sure many of the other districts, is our seniors. The fact that they don't have the housing they need, and that a lot of them would love to downsize, but there isn't any place for them to go. They'd like to be able to stay in Connecticut. They'd like to be able to retire here the way they raise their families here, to be able to stay with their grandchildren. And that's really frustrating to them that they can't, move or change their circumstances. I'd also say, we have a very large population for intellectual and developmental disability. And I'm lucky that in our district, we do have a affordable, housing area called Bearwoods Apartments, where there are 25 apartments set aside for these folks where they are able to live independently of their adult parents. And it gives, I just saw a story again the other day about how much confidence the adult parents have that even if they're gone, that someone will be caring for their adult children. And that's something that we need to see duplicated, frankly, across the state, because if we don't have that in place, that's also a challenge. I think the best part about those types of housing, apartments or whatever, is that it really is a community. And I think that that's what people are looking for. Not only do they want their communities to be bikeable, walkable, livable communities, but they also want to feel like they know the people that they're living with. And that's the great thing about those apartments, is that you see that a lot where, they might not have seen their neighbor who has IDD in a day or two. And so they're going to reach out to the staff and they're going to check in on them, kind of thing. And I think that when we can find better solutions like that, I would not dismiss any of what we did last session. And especially, yes, we had that huge housing bill. We also passed workforce housing and planning and development. We were able to, get MRTA in place. I mean, we hope that that's going to be successful. I think that we have to look at the full picture. And I know that people, there's some confusion as to whether or not we passed fair share. It was a study. But without that detail, and unfortunately, our ranking Representative Zullo isn't joining us yet. We hope he will be with us today. But he stood up, and that was one of the things that he said. I've been asking for this study forever. So to Rep. Luxenberg's point, we really got a lot done last year that had, whether it's representatives or senators have been asking for it, and frankly, our constituents have been asking us to do this work. So we have a lot that we hear about, and a lot more that we're going to hear about.
And I see Senator Rahman moving, so I'm going to try one more time. Senator, what are you hearing from your constituents on housing issues?
Yes, now I hear. I'm sorry. Where I am, my actual internet not really good. So yeah, we hear a lot, concerning housing price mostly. This are out of reach. A lot of people, especially rent, also rising. Unaffordable for the seniors. Ownership is out of reach, rent rising because the only reason because we have the housing shortage. That's the main key. If we can take care of that, we need the more workforce housing, trans-oriented housing, housing for all, affordable housing. So I think that's the main key. But how we can take care of that issue, we are way behind nationwide, nationally. Connecticut should lead, not behind. So I think that's the main issue I'm hearing. Some people have a good job, but they don't have the housing, affordable housing, walking distance, because they don't have the transportation. So those are issues I openly hear, and people asking, can you find something for us? So I think a key is the bottom line is the housing shortage. This is why is the out of reach down, housing price also sky high, and rent also high. So as long as we can
So Senator, we're losing you a little bit on the audio. I would maybe try turning off the video, and it will probably improve your audio. Yeah, let's try it. And I'm gonna bump this next question to you while we have you and see how your audio works. What came out of the session this year? And I'm posing this to everybody. We're starting with Senator Rahman. What came out of this session this year, either within housing development services and supports, home ownership, tenant protections, or broader reform? What came out that you were very excited about? And I know Eleni already touched on some stuff, but what also was on the table that you were hoping would pass and didn't pass, and you're hoping to get back to?
Oh, thank you. Obviously, we had a good bill. We passed the last session. There's the increased protection for rents, including caps on many fees. Also, we put on in place, and also get a walkthrough of the property the tenant has right. Am I right? But the bill, I really love to see pass. Maybe we should revisit that bill, a work-life right, which transit-oriented develop. That's I hear a lot, because transit-oriented develop will be help our business also, because like I said earlier, you have a good job, but you don't have the transportation, and you can keep your job. So you're losing, you quit. Now business owner also is struggling running the business. That's also tied up with our economy. So that bill, I really love to see, and if we can revisit and pass that bill, transit oriented, very important for our economy also.
Sounding much better now. The video turning off was the trick. Thank you, Senator. That sounded great. Thank you. Eleni, kicking it back over to you. Something that I know you already touched on things you're proud of that passed, but what was something maybe that didn't pass this year that you're hoping to really get back to and get across the finish line?
I think my co-chair hit it on the head in terms of, even if we don't get it entirely across the finish line, I think that our bill that was Work, Live, Ride really had, especially by the end, so much support behind it in terms of having, housing along transportation corridors. Now, obviously, there are not transportation corridors across Connecticut, and we are hoping with all of the infrastructure money that's coming into Connecticut to see those changes that will hopefully move that forward. I can speak for the Farmington Valley. We have one bus that goes from the Farmington Valley to Hartford in the morning, and one bus that comes from Hartford to the Farmington Valley in the afternoon. It makes it very inconvenient if you are someone who would like to have the convenience of riding a bus, getting some work done, or maybe just podcast on the way into work. That sort of thing can't happen out here, which is unfortunate. Now, I will say there is a little bit more service on the Farmington side of the Farmington Valley, and perhaps that's something that can, be more robust. I saw yesterday that, the governor is looking at microtransit. That's something that's going to be really important, because that could also go with, transit-oriented development. My hope is that we are thinking logically about who would be living there, and we really need to be thinking about. We just saw we've had this wonderful population burst of over 50,000 people, but we need way more people living in Connecticut. Because if there's one thing we hear about all the time, people don't want their taxes going up. Well, we have to have more taxpayers if we're not going to keep having our taxes going up and up and up. And we frankly need a younger population. We have plenty of jobs here right now. our jobs are increasing. We've got tons of manufacturing jobs. We need to be looking at all the things that go with that. But transit-oriented development is what a lot of the companies that are moving here are, or wanting to move here, are looking for. And it's frankly why we've seen some companies move out of Connecticut. So if we're really thinking about the future of Connecticut, we have to be thinking about where we can have more young people focused, where they have what they need. And number one on their list is often right behind housing, transportation.
Switching over to the housing committee side, Rep Luxemberg, a lot passed this year, obviously, on the housing side. That was a massive bill, but, I'm sure there was a few things that maybe you wanted to see get across the finish line. What do you want to see happen?
Yeah, I think there are three sort of key buckets that are areas where we can maybe build on some of the momentum and successes that we had in our first year chairing together with me and Senator Moore. Those three areas, interestingly, unlike so many issues in the legislature, I think may have some significant elements of bipartisan support, which is very encouraging. So I would describe those areas as one, increasing sort of funding and the effectiveness of programs for people experiencing homelessness. We did have a sort of a tiptoe of success by increasing that funding by $5 million last year, but I think this year is potentially room for additional improvement in that area, and that has bipartisan support. So that's bucket number one. Bucket number two is we didn't do enough to incentivize the production of all types of housing, including affordable housing. Now, it's a little uncomfortable to say that because the budget had, depending on how you add, $800 million in all sorts of housing. So on the one hand, that was a historic investment. On the other hand, if you look around the country and you see 5 new building permits as an average for every 1,000 households, and Connecticut is at 1, you sort of get a sense of how much we need to really lean into removing the barriers to the production of housing and incentivizing the production of housing, and particularly affordable housing. So I think that's got to be a real a real focus area. And the third one, which might be unique to the Housing Committee, is improving our RAP program for the most vulnerable people in the state. I think it was concerning to many that, depending on how you look at the state budget, RAP was either flat funded or cut by $1 million. We've learned a lot about how hard it is to use RAP certificates, how difficult it is to get somebody stably housed with a RAP certificate. And so I think that's both going to take making it a funding priority, but also making some improvements to how that program works to make it function better for everybody, including the nonprofit providers, including the housing authorities, including the people with RAP certificates, and the landlords that are willing to be partners in that important work. So those are my 3 areas, but I defer to my Senate co-chair.
Music to my ears on the RAP comments, Rep Luxemberg, and thank you for your support on that. I just see it. I see a couple of hands up that I can't really address in this webinar. There's a Q&A function. I know Chelsea put in the chat, but folks, please put your questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to try to throw those in as well as the questions I have mixed in. So, but I can't recognize a raised hand because of just the format of this webinar. So please pose your questions. I got an eye on them. The partnership is helping me. We will try to get to your questions. Sorry, and Senator Moore, to you, what's some leftover business from last session that you're hoping to get to this year?
I was listening to Representative Luxemberg. I agree on all 3 that he mentioned. I think there's a lot of work that we need to do. It's going to be a short session, but I also thought about what Representative Kavros Degraw mentioned about how much we really did get done, and I think it's going to be. I think in this last session, was the beginning of what will come, and people have not really experienced or seen or know what is going to happen. Some of this stuff isn't going to happen until 2024, like the environmental justice upgrades. into multifamily homes, I think that's going to make a huge difference, right? And that was in bonding, and we got that bonding in the bill, but now we've got to get the governor to move it in 2024, because I think part of the answer is not just about building new housing, but retrofitting some of the older houses, multifamily houses that could be used for Section 8, could be used for RAP. So I think there's an opportunity there. And then I really want to get back, I don't know how we're going to get it done, but I believe if there's a will, we've got to look at how do we, I know you have a question later about that $50 million. I would invest it in RAP, and I would invest it in homelessness, right? And I think those things, some of the things that I don't think we did enough. You know, $50 million is a drop in the bucket, right? 80 million, that's 800 million is a great number for us to get started, but we're trying to catch up, you know, what has not been done in the past 10 or 15 years, right? So there's a lot on the table that we need to address. And I think people will start to see it as some of these programs roll out and people are made aware. I think that education piece of letting people know, you know, what really passed, what didn't pass, and what is available now or in the future is going to be really important to build confidence in people that we are really working on things. And I think that's really important, that people have confidence that we are doing our job and that we're fighting for them.
Thank you, Senator. Sticking with the Housing Committee just for a minute, and we'll start with Rep. Luxemberg. Many tenants showed up. You and Senator Moore, I think, endured one of the longest public hearings I think it was the longest public hearing of this past year. In the past, planning and development has been the ones with the longest hearing, but I think you guys beat them this year in the Housing Committee. A lot of tenants showed up, and and Senator Moore brought this up in her earlier comments about the short-term and the long-term issues regarding their ability to afford housing and stay in their housing, most importantly. What is something that you think in the short term and the long term can be done to address those tenants' issue?
Oh, well, that's a great question for us. I appreciate it. I think, there's sort of two things. There is the legislature needs to be sensitive and responsive to how many households in Connecticut are rent burdened and are making the horrible choice of paying for their food, paying for their rent, paying for medicine, paying for educational expenses because their rent is just too high of a percentage of their overall income. So in my view, we have to respond to that immediate pain and also the housing insecurity and instability for those that are hurting the most immediately. So I believe we could do that through a very creative proposal called the rental savings account, modeled after a health savings account, where we actually, for the first time, start to really rethink our tax code and make our tax code not just all incentives for home ownership, which are wonderful. We don't want to discourage home ownership, but there is sort of an inequity built into, you might even say a structural inequity built into every local, state, and federal tax policy that has a million incentives for ownership and even investment, even non-owner occupied ownership of residential real estate, and has no incentive, no tax break, no benefit for the person who's working hard, they're playing by the rules, and they're just trying to pay their rent and their income is not keeping up. We need to have a complete paradigm shift there to provide relief right away. And then the second issue, long-term, to solve it is to build more housing and have the supply of housing bring down that supply-demand curve that is so weighted against tenants right now in a way that's unfair. And then I think the third thing, and we made a lot of good progress in bucket 3, but there's more work to do, is to protect tenants who are vulnerable right now, because that supply-demand curve puts them in a vulnerable position, particularly if they have a bad landlord or slumlord. So I think we need to also be constantly vigilant about eliminating junk fees, fines for the bad actor landlords, figuring out how to build in even more protection for tenants who might be vulnerable to abusive practices.
Senator Moore, anything to add on the housing side for the tenants?
You know, this is why I love having Geoff as my co-chair. I think he's really wonderful and well versed on all these, and I think we're the yin and the yang. One of the things I think about is our inability to rent rooms for people, right? And some of that is our zoning that we need to think about. Everybody, I'm telling you, I had spoken earlier that I live in a colonial. You know, at this point, I'm tired of going up to the second floor, right? I'd like to rent all three of those rooms up to somebody else, right? And stay on the first floor. And I think some of this is zoning and us rethinking some of our policies that could be a short-term solution and could also be a long-term solution. So that is the one thing that I would hope that we would start to consider.
I guess I'll volley that. Senator Moore brought up the zoning, so I'll volley that over to Rep. Kavros Degraw. You know, on the issue of zoning, you guys are going to be hearing a lot again from both sides, and I know you brought up the work, live, ride, and TOD development, which obviously has impact on zoning. But was there something else there that you think is missing from the equation that needs to be addressed in the upcoming session?
I'm sure there's a lot that's missing that we need to address. I would point out, because it's bound to come up, you know, people think that 830G is actually under us on planning and development, when in reality it's actually on the housing side. So we have not historically touched that, so I just kind of want to put that out there. Also for historical purposes, I don't know if people know, housing used to be part of planning and development, and then, so we really do, the four of us work very closely together because we kind of have to, right? So in terms of zoning, I mean, I think that there are definitely, you know, there's also changes to building requirements potentially. You know, like I know Rep. Luxenberg and I have talked about, is it necessary to have multiple staircases when it seems to be that in certain buildings, it doesn't mean that it's any less, you know, safe to only have one. And there's a lot of studies on that. I know other cities have looked at things, and I am not saying I am promoting this, but it's interesting that Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., they've made it so that, you know, you can have a no window apartment, room in an apartment, so that you can have, say, it's called a 2-bedroom. One bedroom has a window, the other bedroom does not, and they're not finding that it's necessarily any less safe for egress. I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that we're going to have to get creative on, but even in terms of, you know, zoning, last year, one of the things that we changed that actually ended up in 5001, when you're talking about the IDD community, we were not allowing, towns specifically had, not only did they have a not allowing more than 0.1% of people with disabilities to live in some towns, they also were not allowing for 2 group homes to be co-located within 1,000 feet. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense if you're trying to save money as an organization to share services and try to keep, you know, a village going of people and keep a community together. So I think that we're going to be looking at a lot of different things. I mean, we have so many needs for housing. I grew up someplace where townhouses were the thing. And that's why so many single moms like my mom was able to, you know, move in. And so when we're looking, you know, we need middle housing, we need to think about, you know, whether parking spaces, you know, making sure that not every building has to have 40 gajillion parking spaces per unit. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can be thinking about to move the needle forward. And I hope that even though it's a short session, that we are able to work on some of these.
Senator Rahman, anything to add on your committee?
Yes, I'm gonna turn off my camera, make sure. Yeah. So yeah, and actually my co-chair already touched everything, and Luxembourg and Senator Moore also covered mostly. But I agree with them. Most you know, area they are talking, but I think mixed use development, you know, already there. Am I right? You know, reusing buildings that already exist to create housing. We can you know, finding the more, you know, property across the state, and we can redevelop those area also will be, you know, priority, I think, the next session. And as for the Senator Moore, I agree with her. $50 million in the pocket is nothing. Basically, dropping is nothing compared to where we are right now. We are way behind all kind of housing, affordable housing, trans-oriented housing, workforce housing. You know, my public hearing last time I mentioned 40% people moving in Connecticut, 60 moving out because they finish the college in here, they move out because they can find affordable housing, or kids also after the high school graduation, they move out. They can afford to have the young student or find the housing. So is the bottom line is the main key is creating more housing, affordable housing, trans-oriented, all those housing, and we have a lot of industrial, property, school, and also we have, close so many facilities we can reuse. That's I think should be our priority. Mixed use, basically. I don't know. You obviously knows the main. If you have the certain amount of land, you can subdivide the one land, the 5 different oil. You can build the next to the single family home. You can build a duplex. But in our state, some town, they don't allow that. So I think also state need to look into closely local housing, the zoning regulations, that need to be, I think, the fix. If you go now with the Greenwich, they are not going to allow you single family home next to the duplex, So I think we can talk, but I think that's also another issue. There's a lot of land, single family home, a busy area. We can subdivide, we can build a duplex. So I think this is another thing. It should be our priority in next session. Thank you.
And I think the 50 million question got teased out a little bit. I know Rep. Luxenberg and Senator Moore kind of said what they would do with 50 million. I just want to, that question in the past, just for everybody's context, we used to ask that question every year. And I was looking back at the way I first asked in 2019, and I was asking folks what they would do with $10 million because it seemed like such a gracious thing to find $10 million in the state budget to do something with. But because things have started to cost so much, and because the state of our surpluses have changed, 10 million is beyond a drop in a bucket. So now we're talking about 50 million being a drop in a bucket. So the times have changed sharply. And I guess Rep. Eleni Kavros Degraw, we want to hear from you. If you had 50 million, and not in bonding, but in state line item appropriations, meaning we could get that out and we don't have to put it on the state's credit card, what would you do with it?
Yeah, I think that's downtown. For me, it's the same thing. The reality is that we are on the precipice of a really scary situation with our unhoused folks. I'm watching how the 5 million hasn't yet been distributed to our cans, and it concerns me that we have more people who are on the brink of being evicted and ending up in a homeless situation, and it's 20 degrees at night. Rep. Luxembourg and I were at a press conference about this well over 6 weeks ago. And I'm not entirely sure, though we keep asking, how long these contracts take to get money like that out the door. So last year, our homeless advocates asked for $50 million and they got 5. So if I had a magic wand right now, that is where I put it, to make sure that people have sustainable housing, that they are able to, transition perhaps into, we've got to have all those wraparound services, of course, to get people back to working and leading, lives that they can be proud of and that they can feel the dignity. But I think that the fact that we are in a position where we are offering moms with a 1-year-old, or I heard of another mom that had a 2- and 3-year-old, that we're offering them tents as a solution, that's not a solution. So to me, that $50 million would go towards our unhoused and helping prevent more people from ending up in that situation.
Thank you. Senator Rahman, if you had 50 million on appropriations, what would you do with it?
Yes, right. Thank you. I think my co-chair and more already covered. But like I said, 50 million we are experiencing right. That is state. So even something better than nothing, even if we have 50 million out of eviction, huge right now. We are hearing. I think that we should use the money to build more housing, That's the simple thing. And the second bucket, I would say, creating a lot of eviction there. And third, I think also respond for the homeless, team respond your expenses.
So wow, my son's coming up right. Senator, we're losing you a little bit on
A lot of homeless right now because the housing shortage also. Yeah, where I am right now is not really strong my network.
Right,
So
we can hear you a little
you got what exactly I said? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, better now.
Right. So what I'm saying, if something better than nothing, if we have $50 million right now, I would say should make more housing, and also use some money for the eviction prevention fund, because there's a lot of eviction right now people can afford. And then also homeless, there's a lot of homeless. We should use some money for homeless response team. I believe that,
Thank you, Senator.
Sorry, my internet is really crazy here.
No, we heard you a lot better there. You came through clear. I have a heavenly gaze coming in on me, and I don't know what to do with it, but it's just how it's going to be. I see a lot of interesting stuff in the chat, so I wanted to do a little bit of rapid fire with you guys on these. Are mostly on issues, believe it or not. One of the issues I'm seeing in here is we have a question about just cause eviction protection. We have a question posed: shouldn't tenants who pay their rent be protected from being evicted for no reason? There's a lot of economic and social costs of being displaced after the tenant has made those decisions, and they want to know how to protect folks. That's the housing committee, so I will jump to Senator Moore on that one.
I'm going to pass that to Representative Luxenberg.
Got it. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think in the last 2 weeks, I have met with maybe 15 different advocacy organizations that have all said that is a top priority for them to have the housing committee zero in on this session. So I think one, it's nice to see that the housing advocacy community is working so well together, and that people are sort of rowing in the same direction, because obviously in any advocacy effort, we're stronger together. And secondly, I know that there are, I think, 5 or 6 other states that have different levels of protection like this in their state law. I know there are other states that came close and didn't get there. Senator Moore and I and the legislature are going to take a close look. We're going to take a close look and see how it's working in the other states, what options are available, but it's definitely on the agenda for serious consideration, and I perhaps as we learn more and go through the hearing process, we'll report back.
Thank you, Jeff. Back on the planning and development side, I see a question here about open space grants not allowing building on any preserved land at all. Is there a way to change this so that conservation and affordable housing groups can work together using parcels to preserve open space and create affordable housing subdivision? That's an interesting and loaded question. Rep. Kavros Degraw, take a shot at it.
Thanks so much. I would say, what I have seen in communities is this is, like you said, it's a loaded question because there's often a lot of butting heads, push and pull. I think that we are heading into a new conservation and development plan for the state. Obviously, towns have theirs as well. I think that you're right that the two groups need to work together. I'm not sure that removing those, restrictions is necessarily the way to go. I think that it's more about talking about, as we move forward, how do we approach this? Because we are going to have more situations where people want, land to be part of a land trust. But we also, again, we do have this situation where we've got to have more housing. I've seen some of this in Canton where they are trying to smartly decide, well, perhaps we can do some of this, fill-in housing where it's getting tucked into an already busy corridor, as opposed to taking over somebody's adjacent, something that's adjacent to farmland that they would want to protect. I think that we're going to really see more push and pull. I would love to see people work together on this, especially when we're talking about conservation, because we know that sometimes, there is like it's wetlands, but it's not really wetlands. And then that could be a deciding factor for whether or not a development goes in. Again, I think that this is where, our smart local leaders do come into play. And not all of it can be, determined by us, because we do have to make sure that towns are making smart decisions that work in that specific community. Because obviously, Hartford is a lot different than Camp. So I think we're just going to have to find ways where people can actually work together on this moving forward, as opposed to taking off those restrictions off of existing land.
Senator Rahman, was there anything you wanted to add on that? Just wanted to check.
I want to add, but my internet is not favoring me. I think I hear my co-chair pretty much cover everything I want to say. So I don't want to make sure, 3 times I kick out, that's 3 times actually I kick out. So, I agree with her. Openness is very important. Also, when you go to build something or using the property, land, the problem is the local zoning is the main problem. You know what I mean? So I agree with her exactly what she's saying. Thank you.
Maybe if I could pose to you, I think a lot of you were at the majority leaders roundtable that happened last week, and the developer came forward with CPIA and talked about some of the hurdles that this developer went through with local zoning and trying to get a development done. And this wasn't even a affordable housing development. I think it was a 55 and up a development that he was talking about. But Senator, is there, any comments on kind of what we heard from the developer and how the legislature can kind of, create an environment where development can be done, but also local voices can be heard in a constructive way, as opposed to kind of a no, it can never happen kind of way?
Like I again, disconnect again, so I can add. Local zoning is the main key now. Our hand is tight when you going or builder or developer goes to the local to build or redevelop or anything. They sometimes kick out. It's not allowed that. That's. We need to look into very closely local zoning law regulation. And there is also, we was talking about, there is a lot of reduce the cost for local, the developer and builder to build, they was talking about those things earlier. So again, I think promoting mixed use development and reusing those is the main key. We have already state-wise, all right? Then we can use those if we can utilize those areas and more housing.
I'm going to jump in on that one as well. I think that, the time has come that we are going to start having conversations at the state level, and perhaps it's sort of like an a la carte menu. It's something that I've kind of been noodling where, we give towns an option. So in other words, we say, you can't just keep saying no to everything because that's just not reality. And that's not, again, workforce development, if that's what you want to call it, economic participation, if that's what you want to call it. At a certain point, there are towns that are making decisions that are holding up progress. And progress doesn't have to be ugly. Progress does not have to look like, a 60-story apartment building in your backyard. Progress does not have to look like that. We understand that certain towns want their towns to, be a certain way. I've got a colleague on the committee who often says nobody wants to live in his district. I understand that, again, when you're talking like about transportation corridors, there are a lot of people who are not going to want to live in areas of our state where they cannot get to transportation that gets them to the job that they have. However, if we started to provide some sort of a la carte menu and say, these are I'm going to throw out a number 10 choices. It may be that you're providing more middle housing. It may be that you are going to absolutely guarantee that people can do ADUs. It may be that you're going to do what Senator Moore said, and you're going to change it so that people can rent rooms out of their homes in your town. Whatever it might be, there are other states that are looking at, you have to make a choice. We're not saying what choice you have to make, but you do need to make a choice on how you can move this forward. And that may be a way for everyone to both preserve what they call local control and also meet the need of the 21st century housing that we're missing. So I think that, there's, again, it's the push and pull, but there are more people that are going to have to rise up and say, you know what? It's not just affordable housing. The definition of affordable housing is housing you can afford. I think that's, everybody wants that. That's not just getting unhoused off the street. That is your college students who need someplace to go, who don't want to live with mom and dad. That's your IDD folks. That's your grandparents who are tired of living in that giant house. That's somebody who, you know what, they don't want the responsibility of having to mow a yard anymore, and they'd love to live in a room in Senator Moore's house. So I think that we have to come up with creative ideas here, because there are other states that are doing it, and we are not so unique, even with our 169 unique towns, that we can't figure this out.
And
I just want to comment on that, because Representative Degraw, I think you're spot on, that we all have to look at this differently. Every town has something different to offer. Some places, I live in Bridgeport, we don't have any space. We're building on top of each other, right? There has to be an opportunity to make a decision as what is best for your town. And that's not in my backyard. I've been hearing it my entire life, right? And people think of affordable as low income and low income, right? It doesn't mean that. It means that someone has to be able to afford it, right? And we can't have one town carrying the weight, or 4 towns, it's just the urban centers carrying all the weight, right? People need to be able to live where they want to live. And I think we all have a role to play in making sure this happens. But I think it is up to the legislature to have these conversations with developers, with land trusts, to be working together. I think the roundtable for the majority leaders is a start, right? It's a start, and there was something prior to that. I think these conversations have to come together and say, what is best for the state of Connecticut? Where we want to go? What do we want to look like? Do we want all these homeless people? Do we want to look like a state that does not care about our IDD population or our seniors? We have to figure that out and have an agreement that this is where we're headed, and a roadmap to get us there. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. And when we touched on the majority leaders roundtable, and Senator just brought it up again. I think for my closing question for you guys, with the last 7 minutes or so left, and I'll start with Rep. Luxenberg. Between the majorities leader roundtable, which is there are going to be some interim recommendations coming out before the session, and then there's also, it will continue every year thereafter, so it will be a longer discussion between that and then what the legislature passed back in the 2020 session regarding the Commission on Connecticut's Future, which also is submitting recommendations. Is there something specifically in that package of recommendations that you're looking to address this session?
Great question. So there's so much in that majority leaders roundtable on affordable housing. I am failing to remember the number of subcommittees, but I think it might be like over 6 or 8. I'm on all of them. And it's almost a full-time job in itself, just the subcommittee work. So I think there are going to be lots of recommendations, or whether they're formal or informal, for all of us and the public to ponder. Some of the ones that I haven't been discussed a lot in this panel are sort of this idea of adaptive reuse. How are we converting? It's been touched on a little bit, but how are we converting malls, office spaces, commercial spaces to affordable housing, and what are the barriers that need to be alleviated to do that? I think there might be some interesting financing of the production of housing, or potentially tax or budget issues related to housing that may come out of that. There's just the breadth is so long. I could talk to you for hours probably about it, but I think the short answer is lots and lots of recommendations. I think the real goal, and I know, having worked so closely with my three wonderful colleagues on this panel in the legislature, that I think there is a shared goal from our majority leaders, the legislature, the governor, and the people on this panel, which is everybody understands there's an affordability crisis. And so we have to leave no stone unturned, whether it's making sure people can access rooms in their homes, as Senator Moore has pointed out, or figuring out how to lessen every burden, large or small, to the production. I think that's what the roundtable is really about. It's about saying there's not going to be one area, whether it's looking at tiny homes, whether it's looking at zoning, but there's just the breadth is so wide. And I think our fear, or at least mine, is that we miss a piece. There's some piece of the puzzle that's going to help move the needle to ease this affordability crisis that gets left out. And I think what the Majority Leaders Task Force is doing such a great job of is we're turning over every stone. We're looking at everything. And if there's something, by the way, that you see we're not looking at, tell us what it is, and we will look at it immediately. I mean, there's really that level of depth and policy research, and really diving into the details to try to move the needle. And so what exactly that's going to look like in terms of recommendations, maybe too early to tell. But what's encouraging to me is the level of commitment from my colleagues on this panel and our House and Senate Majority Leader to this issue, and just knowing that we're all working together and willing to do whatever it takes.
Senator Moore, anything to add on the Majority Leaders Roundtable?
Well, when I saw there was a subcommittee on the barriers, I was like, I think that's going to be, we all know what the barriers are. I think the strength of this committee is to put them out there, and that we agree these are barriers, the sewers and transportation. We start to address those issues. It's the infrastructure that we need to address also. But also, what's really important to me, and I think I'm going to make this a priority in this session, working with my co-chair, is how do we really look at affordability in the versus state income, and how do we move existing stock? Because look how long it takes to build something, right? Look at once you get the permits and you go through all the process and you fight the local people who don't want it, and you go through the process of getting all your permits. It takes quite a while, but we have immediate need right now. I mean, I look at what the temperature is outside. What are we going to do right now? So I think we should have long-term and short-term goals. And I think we're hearing that in some of the committees, but also existing stock and how do we use it to build affordability, and how do we get the homeless and people who need housing right now, how do we get them into a place before the snow, before it gets to be freezing? And we should be looking at that right now. And I was impressed by CBIA, who came in and brought the guest in to talk also, and how the gentleman shared how many barriers he faced and what he goes through to get a return on his investment. So I think we have a lot more that we have to pull out of that and decide how are we going to prioritize how we attack this problem.
Thank you, Senator. And I really wanted to ask one more about the Future Commission, but I'm being told that I'm at time, and there is a tight timeline for this conference. But I just wanted to thank all these panelists for sharing their wisdom with you guys. You guys should definitely reach out to any one of these legislators personally to talk about these issues. I find them all to be very receptive and very open and very kind. So, thank you guys for joining me on this panel this year. Thank you for the partnership for hosting. And I hope everybody has a good day, a good rest of the weekend, and a good Turkey Day. And we'll see you all in February.
Thank you, Bill.